on this episode of The Scorekeepers. Join me, Daniel Farrell, as I speak with composer and new music enthusiast Megan DiGeorgio. Megan has been working as a composer, instrumentalist, educator, singer, and just about everything else in the Washington, D.C. area, and is part of several organizations pushing for increased awareness of new music and exposing students to the world of music composition. I can't wait to hear what she has to say. Welcome to The Scorekeepers. Welcome, Megan. It's really great to have you here.
Thanks for having me here.
You got a ton of projects, ton of awards. I remember when I was doing the research here on you, I was like, oh my gosh, where do I even start with Megan? But could you give the audience just a very brief, introduction to yourself and your work and all that you do?
Sure. Yeah, I will do my best. So my name is Megan DiGeorgio. I'm a composer, violist, vocalist, educator, and arts administrator. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm really big on, in my own work, I'm really big on kind of the intersection and the sort of interconnectivity of all of those different pursuits. So I've been doing a lot of composer performer stuff recently. This past May, actually, I gave a whole, a concert length show of my own compositions with some of my favorite collaborators. I also very much consider myself a community builder, and I really believe in collaboration and in community over competition. And I just think that the more we support each other, the more opportunity will exist. In terms of sort of the work that I do, I freelance as a composer and a performer. I am the director of education advancement at Boulanger Initiative, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about later. I am on the leadership team of District New Music Coalition. I do a lot of church music as well, so I have a couple of regular church music jobs. I'm one of the music directors at the St. John Paul II National Shrine, and I'm a section leader at First Baptist Church of the City of Washington, D.C. And yeah, I think that's most of the main stuff.
Did you get your start by singing in church choirs? Is that how you got started in music?
So no, I was actually a violist first. Just sort of started playing viola in the public school system, fourth grade, whatever it was. And I think I started taking private lessons in high school and maybe started trying to write my own music around that same time. So I started out by doing a bachelor's in viola performance with a minor in composition. And then I did a master's in performance, and then I did a master's in composition. And I've just kind of always been one of those people who sort of just wants to do everything. So even when I was doing my performance degrees, for example, I was composing, I was starting to sing in choirs. Singing was something I sort of picked up along the way. I would tutor, I was a music theory tutor, or I was teaching lessons, or I was, doing extracurricular type things, working sort of like student composers, SCI chapter, that type of thing. Yeah, I've never decided what I wanted to be when I grew up, I guess.
You decided you wanted to be everything.
Kind of, yeah.
It's interesting you started on viola so early, and in school too. Where I grew up in Florida, we only had one school in the whole county that had a string program, and it was the arts school, arts academy. It's so often most people are band kids,
Yeah, well, there's actually a weirdly funny story about that. For some reason, it was just time to pick your instrument in fourth grade, whatever. And somehow I got in my head I wanted to play saxophone. And
I also wanted to play saxophone. It's
right?
Cool. It's a cool instrument.
Exactly. It's so cool. It looks so fun. And I went to our band teacher, and I'm a small person generally. And that was still the case then. And I went to our band teacher, and she weirdly scared me out of it. She said something saxophones, you have to support them on your neck, and you're kind of small. She like made me think that I was going to just like hurt myself if I tried to play saxophone. I don't know. It was a very strange experience. So then I was like, well, maybe I'll play a string instrument. All my friends were playing violin, so I thought I'd be different and play viola.
Yeah, viola.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in middle school picking an instrument. I was because my primary instrument is euphonium, and
Okay.
it's like the same mouthpiece as trombone and stuff. So a lot of the time is like you choose between trombone and euphonium. And I remember looking at the trombone and my teacher's arm doing all this. I was like, that looks like so much work. I'm just gonna pick the one with the little valves. So, and I also joined band because I didn't want to be PE. So I guess it was just all around
There you go.
laziness that motivated my musical choices.
But maybe you relate to this as a euphonium player. As a violist, I feel like it was one of the unknowingly smartest decisions of my life because, we're very in demand.
I would say yes, though I do wish that I had also picked trombone up somewhere along the lines for jazz. Somebody, I forgot who it was. Somebody when I was going up was like, euphonium is the iron cello of jazz. So doesn't get quite the jazz gigs. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the Out of Your Shells project and the Emerging Composer Fellowship with Concertia. Is that how it's pronounced?
To be perfectly honest with you, I have not actually, because they're based in Houston and I am based in DC, I have not actually heard anyone pronounce that word. I have been saying, it sounds like such a strange thing because it's this thing that I was awarded, but I've been saying consortia.
Okay.
But I mean,
best guess.
If anyone from that organization is listening and I said your name wrong, I'm very sorry. I'm sure that there will be links to things and people can find you appropriately.
But congrats on getting on those two programs. And can you tell us a little bit about you're getting commissioned basically for works for both of these? If you could talk a little bit about what you're doing for each of those organizations.
Sure. So the Out of Our Shells project was a really, really cool thing. So there were kind of three main people running it: Aram Sinreich, Dinia Best, and Neil Perry. They're all out of American University. And this project was done through something that they have called the Humanities Truck. And it's this very, very cool looking vehicle. I think it's a refurbished food truck, maybe. And so every so often, I forget exactly how long the cohort lasts, but they have truck fellows and they get a grant from the Humanities Truck Foundation to do whatever project it is they want to do. And Out of Our Shells imagined using the Humanities Truck as kind of a mobile recording studio. And their goal was to bring together different artists in the DC area who were creating music and, professionally record a track of each one of the artists and then compile them into this sort of digital compilation. And so they selected 14 artists just from kind of an open call in just a huge range of styles and genres. I was the only, and I'm using big old air quotes here, but the only classical artist.
Yeah, I remember when I looked, I was totally blown away by the amount of genres that they had covered.
It was super cool. Yeah. So it was a really, really neat thing to be a part of. So throughout the last spring, I guess, it was maybe starting in February through April, something like that, they had recording sessions for each of us. The piece that I had recorded was a solo cello piece called Seed Quiescence. And one of my favorite people to collaborate with in this area, Erin Murphy Snedeker, she performed that, and we recorded it at one of my church jobs because they have this, this big stone, beautiful building, which is great acoustics for a solo cello. So they brought the truck, and so we did maybe a half day or so of recording that piece, and then they compiled it all into compilation. And then there was also like a live show element, which was just my favorite thing in the world. So I think 9 of the 14 artists were then featured on this live show at a really cool venue in DC called Rhizome DC. And it was this like 4-hour, they gave each one of us a set of, maybe 10, 15 minutes or so. And just the huge range of genres that were represented. Like, I think my set was in between a cumbia group, and I think it might have been there was one act that was a couple of brothers that were rappers, and their father who kind of makes their beats for them. So I think that might have been where I was in the program. But it was just so fun to meet all of the other artists, and it was so great that they brought together all of our audiences kind of into one place. And
it helps people discover, new artists, new genres that they would never go and listen to on their own.
Exactly, yeah. And it's funny. It's funny in retrospect. I had people coming up to me saying things like, "Oh yeah, when I heard there was classical music on this concert, I was like, not looking forward to it." You know what I mean? But then after obviously they didn't say that to me before I performed. But then afterwards, they came up to us and were like, "Oh, that was so cool. That wasn't what I expected at all." So we ended up performing, me and Erin, this cellist, who's also a composer herself, actually. She played the solo cello piece that we had recorded. I did a piece of my own for violin, voice, one performer. So I write pieces for myself to play and sing simultaneously. So I performed one of those. And then we actually did a piece that we co-wrote, which was really fun, a piece for viola and cello that we composed together, which was a very fun experience.
It sounds amazing. And were the recordings were done separately than the live show, right? It wasn't a recording of the live show.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the recordings were more or less studio recordings. Gotcha. They were at a variety of places. Yeah, the live show, it was outside, lots of ambient noise, some sirens and stuff. So definitely wouldn't have wanted the recording to be of that.
And can you talk a little bit about the Emerging Composer Fellowship with our mystery word organization, Consortia?
Yeah, absolutely. So I forget exactly what the timeline was for being selected for that, but basically it was 421-22 was the cohort, and the 3 composers were selected for it, essentially, and each one of us was kind of selected to write either a trio, a duo, or a solo. So I was selected for the solo work, and actually it ties into the Out of Our Shells project, because the piece that I wrote for that was Seed Quiescence, the solo cello piece that then got recorded for Out of Our Shells. You didn't even know that when you put those 2 questions together. Yeah, so it was sort of a commission situation, and so they also recorded it, and they have, I think there are plans in the works to do a live show as well. And like I said, they're a Houston-based organization, so I'd love to go out and see that happen when it gets scheduled. But yeah, it was a cool thing to be a part of. The other 2 composers are also really exciting. One, I think, lives in Mexico, and one is in Singapore. And wow. Yeah, so yeah, it was a neat thing, and a great. When I got selected for it, it was still, of course it's still COVID now, but it was still like COVID. And so it was.
I love that we don't really have a name for that phase.
We don't. I know. It was like, well, there was like COVID, and then there's now, which is
still COVID, but not
COVID, but I don't know. Yeah, but it was very much in the sort of height of it. So it was really great to have a reason to be writing something, something to be sort of working towards, and a performance on the horizon. So
you mentioned briefly, talking when you were doing your introduction about being on the leadership team for the District New Music Coalition, which promotes contemporary music in Washington, D.C. And I actually I saw on your Instagram that you had held a DC 2022 concert, which is, amazing. So can you just walk us through, like, what is that organization? What does it do? What is your role in that organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So District New Music Coalition, or DNMC, as we call it. That's exactly right. We try and foster the new music community in the DC area. And we do that through individual concerts. Like, we'll usually try and have a concert series each year. We have an annual conference, which is kind of like our big central event. And we try and do networking events, like new music happy hours have been how we've done that a lot in the past. So I wasn't always on the leadership team of that organization. The first couple of events they had, I was just sort of a participant. The first couple years of the New Music DC conferences, I submitted works to be performed. So I was involved in that way. I was kind of a composer who had my music performed at the conferences. But now I'm on the other side of things, and I'm sort of one of the organizers. And we're coming up on the organization's 5-year anniversary, which is very exciting. And yeah, so in October, we just had our 2022 New Music DC conference. And so we tend to rotate where we hold them throughout the DC area. They've all been at universities so far. And so we've been at a different place each year. This year was at the University of Maryland in College Park. Yeah, we had a number of presenters and composers and performers. We had some cool additions this year. So we had like a headshot station, which was really cool. So
that is cool.
Yeah,
very useful.
Yeah, exactly. Just sort of, we're always trying to think of like what we can give back to this community and what needs there are. We really try and foster, connections between composers and performers, or just enthusiasts in general. And we had a really, really excellent spotlight ensemble this year. Ligament, they're just a fantastic double bass and voice duo. And so they were our sort of ensemble in residence for our spring summer concert series. And then they also were our spotlight at the conference itself. They gave a sort of plenary session and a whole spotlight concert. They're really excellent. Yeah, so it was a great time. It was really good to be. We've had one other in-person conference since COVID, but it was last year. It was a bit more difficult. Just there were a lot more. It was hard to have a lot of pieces that involved wind or brass instruments.
Right.
Like there were just still things that we couldn't quite do. So it felt really nice this year to be kind of fully back and really to get to see our community, have a nice post-conference, social hang. And yeah, so it's been really good. It's the leadership team is made up of 7 people, a mix of composers and performers and other, new music enthusiasts. I keep using that word. There's definitely a better word for it, but yeah, but it's a really fun group to be a part of. And the new music scene in DC is exciting and growing, and I'm glad to have a part in that.
It's cool you worked with Ligament. I when you said that, I was like, and you said double bass and voice, I was like, oh, that sounds so familiar. And I've worked with them before. I don't think I've commissioned a piece or with them, but they were like a guest artist at a festival I went to in Italy. And
oh yes, Cortona.
Cortona, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Will and Annika,
yeah. They're
a duo.
Excellent. Yeah, just the types of sounds they make. And yeah, their entire program that they presented at the conference was all things that either they had commissioned themselves or things that were reworked specifically for it. Like it was all stuff that was made for them, which is just a really cool thing.
Is the DNMC, is it mostly students, or do you have a lot of maybe working professionals in the DC area as well? Like, how does it? Is there a lot of mentorship for younger composers in that organization?
Yeah, so that's something that we have tried to foster especially through our conferences. Whatever university we hold the conference at, any student of that university can just come to the conference for free. We also just have student tickets in general for all of our events, because we definitely do want to foster that. There are a ton of universities, music schools in the DC area, and we really want to like, help these people have sort of somewhere to go after they graduate. I think when the organization was founded, it was actually the original founders were all doctoral students at the University of Maryland, and they were kind of like, we don't, why doesn't this school talk to this school, and why don't, we're also sort of insular. I mean, composers can be a very kind of insular group of people. We just sort of, I just write my music, and so it's sort of trying to kind of fix the gaps that might exist because of that.
I'm also really super excited to talk about the Boulanger Initiative, which you mentioned, which you're the director of education advancement for. So can you tell us a little bit about, that group, the work you're doing with students in the DC area?
Absolutely, yeah. So Boulanger Initiative is an organization that advocates for women and all gender marginalized composers. And we do that through performance, education, research, consulting, and commissions. So, as you said, I'm the director of education advancement. And so there are a lot of things that means. One of the main things that I work on are just sort of individual school visits. So like this past fall, we've had, I think, about 6 of these for local DC area schools. And basically I'll go in, and maybe it's a music class, maybe it's not, depending on what teacher signed up for it or whatever. But I'll go in and I'll teach them about a few women composers throughout history and present day who they might not have heard of. We listen to some of their music and sort of discuss what their lives would have been like. And then I always pair that with some kind of composition activity for the students, either like a group composition, or we'll do sort of, activities where they get to sort of like make a line drawing, and then I'll sort of interpret it on my instrument. And so something that is creative inherently, that gets them creating and showing them from both angles that anybody can be a composer, right? So that's a big thing that I do. We're also starting this year a long-term partnership with a local all-girls school. So it'll be kind of similar to the one-off school visits, except just more regular. Over time, we'll be a regular presence in their school. We're going to do a mix of sort of informational education, composition workshops, and some professional development and curriculum design with the teachers and the staff, which will be really good. We're going to work towards a kind of end of year capstone project. So just kind of a longer scale, bigger scale of our one-off school visits, which is really exciting. Another thing that we do is we've had a whole series throughout the fall of 2022 of virtual workshops, which are a collaboration with the education and research departments at BI. And so there have been a whole variety. So there have been some kind of research-focused ones, sort of Research 101 type of things. A couple programs that I've kind of more taken the lead on from a sort of educational standpoint. We had one last week that was called Creating an Inclusive Classroom and Curriculum. So it's kind of just focusing on some best practices, geared towards educators, about sort of best practices, how to make students feel welcome in your classroom, how to, not just present music of dead white European men, and, how to incorporate some diversity into your curriculum and lessons, and that type of thing. And actually, on the day that we're recording this, I have another one tonight that I'm leading, which I'm excited about, which is called Creating Original Music as a Transformative Act. So again, is geared a bit towards educators, but really any professional or arts leader, or, kind of whoever, but just talking about, the value of creating your own music and the value of incorporating that into, educational settings, and kind of how to level the playing field when it comes to, students learning how to compose. By the time, I'll try not to repeat too much of the presentation that I'm giving tonight, but basically, by the time we get to collegiate composition studios, they're still, about 70% male, so then just kind of like looking backwards and seeing, what's happening before that point that so many people are self-selecting out. And so that's kind of the focus of the one tonight.
I mean, it's amazing that you're going into public schools and talking about composition, just like period. I feel like there's like almost no exposure sometimes for high schoolers. I feel like college is oftentimes the first moment when they're being exposed to talking with a composer, studying to be a composer. I wish that when I was in high school, I'd met a composer.
Yeah.
It's just a name on a page most of the time when you're in band or choir or whatever. You don't really actually think like that's a person and what is their process and how can I be a composer,
Absolutely. And one of the things, like when I give presentations like this, one of the things that I often share is that when I was looking to, apply to college, I knew I wanted to do music, and I actually had already written some music and I was interested in being a composer, but I just fully just assumed I was not qualified to apply to be, a composition major. It's like, I don't have any formal training in this. And, so, and I, not that I regret being a performance major at all, but it's interesting because I got to college and I was in the composition studio as a minor. When I think back on it now, probably most of those people in the composition studio hadn't had composition lessons before college, right?
It's exceptionally rare to have composition before college.
Exactly. So, so then you think about that and, who is maybe more willing to, who at that age would have the confidence to to pursue that anyway. And I think that there's kind of a disparity though. So yeah, going into schools and just showing them that, yeah, you can be a composer. I mean, I'll do this with, with fifth graders even, like, have them do a little line drawing and be like, yeah, this is your composition,
That's amazing. That would blow my mind if I was a fifth grader.
It's so fun. The students are usually very into that part of the presentation. They all want to have their lines performed. And what's cool about it too is that, so I usually bring my instrument and I sort of interpret their little drawings for them. But sometimes they'll be, like if I'm going and presenting to like a band class, then I can say like, well, okay, I didn't get to everybody's today, but you can, you can interpret your own, and sort of like letting them sort of go forward with the activity without it having to go through me, which is really fun.
Yeah, I wish that, I feel like when I was an early composer, I never really put two and two together that I could just perform my own music. Like that didn't like cross my mind. And interpreting your own stuff could be its own kind of unique challenge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we sort of silo these things, and as I was mentioning before, like a big part of my creative practice is the integration, of these different pursuits, but it definitely wasn't always that way. I mean, I think back to like, I was full on a performance major and a composition minor. And I think the first time I performed my own music, might have been my senior recital. Like it just wasn't, it wasn't super, I don't know, just like it didn't even occur to me. It's just like you said, it's like, it's just like, yeah, well, there's me as a performer and then there's me as a composer.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, these things are all so useful to one another. I mean, that's why I love to encourage students to compose, because even, maybe some of them will want to go on to be professional composers. That's super exciting. even if not, it gives just like a totally new perspective on music and what
I think
music
it
is, what it
often,
can
as a
be.
performer, makes you a better performer because now you're starting to think from the other side of the paper about what was their intent, with this whole line that they wrote down.
100%. Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, so I very much believe in that, no matter who you are, creating original music into your practice is always a good thing.
So talking about new music and being a performer, we have to talk about the Artifice Ensemble, which you're a founding member of. What is the process like for creating a new music ensemble?
So for context, Artifice is a new music or contemporary music choir based in the DC area. And yeah, so actually it all ties in. It's great. It kind of started from one of our New Music DC conferences. Our original, the sort of impetus behind the group was someone named Casey Cook, and he kind of came to the conference and was just talking to people and like, hey, would there be interest in this? Oh, you're a singer, like, would you be interested in doing this? You're a composer, would you be interested in writing for this? Eventually I think there was kind of maybe a Google form that people could sort of more formally indicate their interest. And then for a while, we just kind of had reading sessions. So nothing super formal, nothing that there wasn't like a specific project on the horizon. I can't remember how many of them there were, but probably 4 or 5 that were just purely reading sessions. So if you were a composer, you could sort of submit your own music to be read, because the whole ensemble is really conceived of as a collective where members of the ensemble are the composers, are the conductors, and it's kind of fluid in that way. So there are a lot of composers in the group, and so we just kind of were feeling out like what rep we like, what works for us, who keeps coming back and who's interested in kind of being the core of this ensemble. And eventually our first performance was in collaboration with another DC organization called Stage Free. And so we were sort of featured on a concert of theirs. And that took place on March 6th, 2020. So obviously, as a choir, had to take a break for a little bit after that. But it was a great debut performance. We were in a very sort of unusual concert space. And it was, we were able to incorporate some sort of different configurations, even some movement while we were singing. I had a piece premiered on that concert actually called The In-Between Spaces, as did one other, maybe two other of the ensemble members also had pieces on that concert. And there were, a few different members of the ensemble conducted various pieces. I think there may be 4 conductors total. So it was definitely conceived of as this, this kind of collaborative atmosphere where everybody kind of has a hand in it. So like I said, we had to take a little bit of a break during COVID, but the most recent COVID, right? When things were actually not allowed to happen. Yeah, and then the most recent thing we did was actually a very cool project. We premiered a micro opera by Sam Beebe and Liz LaFleur, and it was at this opening event for the Kennedy Center's Art Summit 2022. And Liz LaFleur is, I'm forgetting what some kind of fellow, I forget what the exact name of it is, but was some kind of like featured artist. And she wrote the libretto and Sam Beebe wrote the music. And it's from a collection called Pow Pow Power Up, Someday Is Now. And this micro opera is called Green Fingers 1969. And so it was, how many of us was it? It was a group of us from within Artifice, maybe like 10 of us or something. And we were performing it. I think the original plan was it was progressive, so we moved throughout different stations and spaces. And it was originally supposed to be outside. I think it got rained out, so we ended up, the different stations were within the big kind of atrium of the Kennedy Center. And so, but that was also pretty cool. So that was a really fun project to be a part of. We got to interact a bit with the composer and the librettist through the rehearsal process, and then of course at the performance itself. And it was just, it was nice to be back doing stuff again.
Yeah. Is that is there anything, I mean, when was that? Is there going to be stuff in the future for that group?
So that was in May. I mean, I am hopeful that there's going to be some stuff on the horizon. I've heard talk of things, hopefully. I don't know if anything's official yet, but yeah, I think that there will be some things on the horizon for that group.
Amazing. I mean, there's just so much here and so much that you're involved with. I mean, I'm from New York. I'm not in the DC area, but the DC new music scene sounds amazing from what I've heard from you. Do you have any sort of major projects coming up on the horizon that you want to plug?
There is, let's see. This is a hard question at the moment. There's nothing official.
Okay.
That I can say at this moment. There are some things that are in the works, some projects, maybe sort of like a guest artist residency, possibly even being featured on an album or two, but nothing is like quite, quite official. But I will post about all of these things on my website and on my socials. So,
of course,
when things are official.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always those projects where you're not allowed to talk about it just yet.
Right.
Well, it's been fantastic talking to you and hearing about all these different projects that you have. And of course, we'll have links for your website and your social media and anything else you'd like to plug for our audience to go ahead and check out. And of course, anything we've talked about, we'll of course have links for. But Megan, it's been amazing talking to you, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Megan has done some truly incredible work in the DC area, and they are really lucky to have her. You can, of course, see and listen to everything we talked about in the link dump in this episode description. Thanks for listening to The Scorekeepers. The Scorekeepers is produced by Daniel Farrell, music and sound, with graphic and visual design by Patrick Farrell. Scorekeepers is proudly hosted and recorded using Zencaster. Make sure you subscribe to hear new episodes of The Scorekeepers wherever you listen. And be sure to rate and review this episode to help us find new listeners. Thanks for listening.